Libya declaring ceasefire after UN resolution was declared last night.
So like Gaddafi is yesterday saying to the people of Benghazi, I'm coming tonight.
Yes.
I'm going to wipe you all out. It's going to be door to door. Don't even think of hiding in the cupboards. We're going to neutralize you. Then there's a UN resolution saying, you know, we're going to now have...
What do you think happened?
Well, I think what always happens with UN resolutions is that somebody vetoes them, right? So the fact that the Russians and the Chinese said, okay, we won't veto it, then the door is open and everything changes because, of course, the Fifth Fleet or whatever it is parked in the Mediterranean and they can send one of those Predator drones down on his house. So I'm thinking that, you know, Mr. Gaddafi finally realized the game was up. So now he's got his foreign minister out saying that it's peace, love and harmony and that they're going to respect human rights and it's now, you know, Mr. Humanitarian. I mean, it's a complete joke.
So
the oil price is sharply down.
Well, down. It's only down around 0.3% last I checked, so it was down a little lower earlier. $115 a barrel or so. Yes, it did have that initial reaction, but I suppose the big thing still is Bahrain and contagion into Saudi Arabia, and that will create havoc. And Yemen is still experiencing a lot of tension.
Because we know that some of the Libyan infrastructure has been damaged already. Some people saying it was damaged by the Gaddafi people. And in any event, that's privately operated. The big key with the oil markets is there are two key players in it, and that's the Russians and the Saudis, because they're the biggest net contributors. The Saudis are also important because they've got large net reserves. So I think you're right. From the perspective of world oil prices, it's much more important to watch what the Iranians and the Saudis are saying about Bahrain at the moment.
And exactly, and Libya is only around 2% of global oil supply, so it's quite minimal in comparison.
It is very confusing because now what does this mean? Does this mean that all bets are off and that the UN and the US are going to be supporting anyone who puts their hand up? Breaking on the wires right now is a story that in Yemen, which is south of Saudi, there have been a whole lot of people shot by Yemeni authorities in like sniper attacks. So it's a very febrile situation and we'll have to just wait and see where it goes.
Well, speaking of very difficult situations, if we turn our attention to Japan, and no real news in terms of the extent of the contamination, a lot of radiation concerns that could actually feed through as close as China and I think California as well.
We must be reading the different news stories. I only ever read the ones that say the problem's about to go away.
Well, they're even talking about a Chernobyl-type solution. They're talking about burying
the ones I'm reading are that
plants.
They've got the Operation extension lead, you know, where they're going to like run up the power to the plant so they can turn back on the cooling circuits. The radiation hasn't spread particularly far. I think the whole nuclear thing is starting to subside, and we'll know that once the headlines start to pass. I still think, though, that the big rogue factor to watch is an aftershock on the earthquake front.
But they've had so many aftershocks. I mean, earthquakes 6 on the Richter scale.
Which is by all measures massive, exactly. I'm not so sure, though, that those haven't been sort of off to one side and causing just a little bit of building shake. So the ones we don't want are those that like take out major
6 on the Richter
and set everything back. But I really do think that the average time to recovery, apparently, of these kind of crises is about 12 days in terms of the market moves. So I'm thinking this thing's not going to be with us for too much longer, and for then it's just going to be the mopping up operation.
So it's amazing. So we have this secret protocol guide that was created yesterday, the G7 group of nations discussing a way forward and intervening in the currency market. In fact, an unprecedented move that we haven't seen since 2000.
Yeah, so the currency markets have been quite volatile. The yen first strengthened, which didn't make any sense at all, and there was talk about people repatriating funds and so on. That seems a bit premature. It's kind of settled down. But my understanding is that the G7 finance ministers had like a conference call, and they all agreed that they were going to do what needed to be done with regard to, you know, stabilizing markets. I think the bigger and more interesting issues to flow out of this incident is what does it do for the debate about global warming, and what does it do for the energy discussion? Because, you know, the jokers were saying, well, you know, South Africa have reviewed their nuclear power stations and they've deemed them to be perfectly safe unless something bad happens.
Don't you love that comment? And then my favorite is Angela Merkel also closing down 7 nuclear plants and pushing energy prices up around 10%. And we're talking about stress tests on nuclear plants in Europe. So it's also been something to focus on.
But at the same time, we've had our cabinet energy plan out overnight, which said that...
Which includes nuclear.
Includes nuclear. So it's not, this whole event never happened. We are now going to pursue renewables and we're going to pursue nuclear. So that means more plants. So if you've got property at Cape St. Francis, be expecting them to be selling with lower prices next week. And then coal has an important role to play. So, you know, it's all in the mix. I guess this is how these decisions get made.
Absolutely. I suppose it's also about, you know, the geography of the things. I think that we really need to start relooking as to where we build these power plants.
And what about your thorium
yes,
story?
I'm going to get into it. I know you're dying to mention it. Okay, so thorium, it's something that we covered on CNBC Africa this time last year, and I think a lot of people were raising their eyebrows as to why we were covering this story. But thorium is basically the alternative to uranium, and it has been on the agenda, especially the Indian agenda, as an alternative source for energy. Very similar to uranium, and I suppose many are asking why we haven't used it as yet. Very interesting question. We still don't know. But one of the things we do need to focus on is that it can't create the radiation havoc that we're seeing now.
So it's safer when things go wrong.
Absolutely. Have you bought into my story?
No, but you know, I was reading up some stuff overnight because I wasn't going to get hijacked now in this situation. And you know what I found is that the technology is not really the big issue. Nuclear power stations are basically the same design and have been for the last 60 years. The reason is they're so expensive to build, they have to go through so many permitting rounds that there's a real desire not to move away from existing so-called proven technology. That's why the pebble bed reactor thing never got off the ground. So you're right, it's probably a much better solution, and if somebody had made the decision at the beginning. But the way it looks going forward, I would imagine the safest thing's going to be, safest. I think what's going to happen is that people are just going to press on with the current projects that they've got to hand.
Absolutely, until something goes wrong, and then
well, hopefully things like this don't go wrong too often. And I mean, at least there was an external cause. It wasn't as though this thing was brought on just by negligence. It was brought on by the worst earthquake you could imagine. And actually, some people are saying that the power station held up quite well under the circumstances.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's just, I mean, looking at thorium, looking at alternative energy, looking at alternative sources of energy. Where to from here? What are you looking at?
I'm happy that we're going to see a continuation of all these things as we've seen them before. I think the energy policy is going to be, you know, business as usual within a couple of days.
Speaking of energy, just do it.
Well, I don't know. We were
results.
So irritated because one of our stocks in New York, Nike, you know, the sports apparel good maker, has had fabulous results since 2006 on the back of all these teams that have been winning World Cups, clubs like Barcelona where everybody wants to wear Messi's shirt and so on and so forth. And then they have a earnings miss and the stock is down 10% in New York. I'm totally gutted.
Are you gutted? Is it going to? Are you not gutted often though?
The theme that we're trying to invest in here.
Isn't the theme? I mean, isn't it a buying opportunity for you?
The theme is bling. I think it is a buying opportunity because the outlook for them is extremely positive. Because remember, the idea that people want to have these so-called luxury goods and that they are aspirational. I mean, you see people of all walks of life sporting Kaiser Chiefs shirts in this country. That's a Nike product. There's a Nike manufacturing margin in all of that stuff. So, I mean, for me, it's a perfect opportunity. And, you know, it probably is a stock which has delivered a lot, promised a lot. And you know what they say about growth stocks that disappoint people's earnings expectations, then they get hammered.
Exactly, but there's also a lot of competition in that space. And I suppose you're also seeing a lot of these brands. And
Adidas
Nike's been around for so long. Can it maintain this very strong momentum?
I would say so. And, you know, they continue to make new deals and relationships. Okay, they had to kick out Tiger Woods, but now they've got Leo Messi. You know, it just moves along.